and community. My dad wasn't a big businessman by any stretch of the imagination, but as a salesman, he was extraordinary. And I know that the skills in terms of the gift of the gab are invaluable from a marketing perspective, no matter what business or what enterprise you move into. And I think that's a big part of why sometimes I'm referred to as a capitalist with a heart, having parents that came from both sides of the business world, if you will.
Yeah. And then your mom, as a social worker, she certainly had that empathy side. And I think that's where the heart comes from. So yeah, the capitalist with the heart. I love that term. I love that term. Was there ever a defining moment in your youth, 8, 9, 10 years old, that you said, I think one day I'll be in business, or did this sort of happen by chance? How did it all happen?
It really took a long time in terms of, I was asked to give a talk on entrepreneurship when I funded something called the Willson Center for Entrepreneurial Excellence at the University of Saskatchewan. And they asked me to go back to my roots and talk about my entrepreneurial experience. And I struggled because I didn't in my mind have anything that was particularly entrepreneurial. But as we started wrestling with what had gone on in my life, from mowing lawns for the next door neighbor.
Did you really mow lawns?
Absolutely.
Oh, I love it. Awesome.
Well, but I didn't do a very good job at it. Okay, let's be fair.
Okay,
I mowed the lawn successfily, but I didn't ask her for money up front.
Okay.
And I went at the end of the summer expecting about $30 is what I expected for 20 lawn cuts. And she gave me $5 and a can of Coke. And it was about setting expectations in the relationship. And, even in dating, I'm a little carefuler now. Okay, where are we going with this? This is pure water.
We can change that. Now, what did that teach you? You did those lawns and you worked probably pretty hard.
Well, it taught me a lot about setting expectations up front. Even a handshake at the beginning of the summer that said, I'll cut your lawn for $1.50. But my dad had said to the neighbor lady, my son can cut your lawn. I just took off cutting the lawn. I knew other kids were making $1 or $2, so I figured at the end of the summer I'd go collect. But I was absolutely gobsmacked, I think it's the word that's polite, when I sat there and she handed me $5. I was like, I worked the whole summer for $5.
What'd you do with the $5?
Oh, I drank that away. Coke was cheap then.
Coke and Pepsi and a bag of chips goes a long way.
Absolutely.
I think when you talk about that character makeup, and I know there's a lot of people in Toronto that are looking at starting business, and maybe you're not sure if you have that entrepreneurial makeup. I think maybe some people are born entrepreneurs, but I think you can also learn to be an entrepreneur.
Oh,
did you learn to be an entrepreneur?
I'm firmly of the view that you could. One of the great shows about our business of entrepreneurship was the Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, Trading Places.
Yeah.
And that whole issue and question of is it nature or is it nurture? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Right.
And I believe in both. Some cultures are more entrepreneurial by nature, and sometimes it's just the ethnicity of having been an immigrant into another country and having to make a living.
Sure.
You were forced to open grocery stores or create small businesses or whatever it is. And a lot of cultural opportunities exist or a lot of cultures celebrate entrepreneurship more than sometimes our core Canadian roots. And by that I mean the Jewish community and its love of entrepreneurship. And I know every Jewish mother wants their son to be a doctor, and if they fail medicine, they become a lawyer, and if they fail that, they become an entrepreneur. There's a whole process there. But the Greek community with all those letters in their names, and they celebrate, and most ethnicities do a better job than I do, whatever. But they celebrate the entrepreneurial experience. This country was developed built on the backs of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
The hunters, the trappers, the lawyers, skip those. The farmers, all of those people were the entrepreneurs who opened our country as we went across from one coast to the other. And I think we as a nation sometimes forget to celebrate the entrepreneurial experience.
If I could find a picture of Brett Willson in his high school yearbook, and Brett, I promise him we haven't done that. It's on the screen, I don't think. If there was a little section that said, what will Brett Willson be doing when he graduates, what would it have said?
I was asked in grade 5, and I still remember saying I wanted to be a mad scientist.
Right.
And I got away with mad. I wasn't a particularly good scientist. I ended up studying engineering. I do have an engineering degree, and that was my first experience at university and education.
Now, entrepreneurs, often we say that they think outside of the box. Maybe they have a little bit of rebel in them. I did some research, and my sources tell me that there might have been some times in your youth, Brett, that you may have been brought home in a police car once or twice. Any truth to that?
What's the relevance? Where did you take this stuff up? What do you got
You told me to ask away, my friend.
Okay, no need for comment. Yes, I got brought home maybe twice. Okay, 3 times. I got into a little bit of trouble as a youth, for sure.
Okay.
Acting out a little bit. I had a challenge, in a bizarre way it was a challenge, and I think it was something that was intended to be good for me, but I sort of skipped a grade. I took 3 grades in 2 years when I was younger, and I was small for my age, and by the time I was in grade 4 or 5, I was easily the smallest kid in the class, and acting out was a lot more fun than trying to fit in. And you can only come last in a running race so many times before you start to give up. And I can still remember in tears not wanting to go to school around sports days or some of the athletic events, because they had grade 4s played grade 4, grade 5 played grade 5, and I just didn't fit in. I didn't want to be part of that. And so ultimately through that in high school, made some mistakes, if you will, in terms of who I hung out with. And I can't blame them for the break and enter, but actually I'm not even admitting to anything. Where'd you get this stuff?
So we're okay, we're safe. It stays in this room. Goes no further.
That I'd appreciate.
The Dragon guys don't know about this, do they?
It wasn't us. They didn't have to call me. My mom was a social worker. She was close friends with the cops. They knew where to bring me. There was nothing that had to be brought up again. Ever. Ever. To be clear.
Let's talk about risk. Okay? I think entrepreneurs, they believe in risk, but I think they look at risk differently.
Absolutely.
There's there. Tell me about that.
Well, I think there's a perception that, from an outsider's perspective, people who don't get involved with starting and running and operating their own businesses, that entrepreneurs are kind of like gamblers, where they get a thrill out of standing at the craps table and rolling the dice and seeing whether or not they got a shot at it. I don't fundamentally believe that. I actually think that most entrepreneurs simply view risk differently. So when I started my own business, brokering oil and gas properties, I had competitors and friends going, "What are you doing? Is there a business there? Are you going to make it?" And I was looking at it going, absolutely, there's no question in my mind. So it wasn't like I was there to take the risk. It was there because I saw an opportunity and I wanted to grab it and seize it. And it was the right thing at the right time. But again, it's about perceiving risk differently. And I think sometimes you just can't explain to your mother why you're going to do something.
But we know that risk is still there. But you're right, we look at it totally different.
Well, it also comes from confidence. If you know your market, and you know yourself, and you know what you're trying to get into, then there's little doubt that you'll have a better than 50-50 chance of being successful, or the odds are stacked in your favor, whatever they are, in terms of being accomplishing something more than what was there the day before.
You talked earlier that you skipped a couple grades, and you were in actually university taking engineering at age 16. Pretty young. What did that teach you? Well,
first thing in terms of engineering was it was a fresh start. I hadn't really fit in real well in high school, but in engineering I was suddenly with a group of geeks. I felt at home. They were all pimply faced with bad haircuts, and we all looked the same and talked the same. But what I also discovered was I was no longer one of the brighter kids in the room, and in fact there was lots of people who were a ton brighter than I was, and I was going to have to scramble to keep up and be in the game. And I ended up on scholarship in my first couple of years of university, and so that was rewarding in itself. But then I found my real passion, which was, as it turned out, student politics, and got actively involved with, I think I had 7 elected positions in my last 2 years on campus, from the residents to the Senate to the central students body, all sorts of activities. And I really came into my own, but my marks started to slip at that point. And yes, you can dig up a story on that.
I just kind of think, engineering mad scientists, they kind of...
It went hand in hand.
So maybe you were following a bit of your passion. Then you went on and you said, okay, you're going to do your MBA. Was it hard to get into the MBA program for you?
Okay, you've done your homework.
I've done my homework, Brett.
I walked up to the reception desk at the MBA program at the University of Calgary and explained what I wanted to do. And they asked me 2 or 3 questions. And I hadn't been there 2 minutes, and they said, "We're not even going to give you the application."
Right.
And it was partly because my graduating average for engineering was just a graduating average of 61 or 71 or whatever. It was just enough to get out of the program. And in fact, I'd already failed reinforced concrete part 2, but I don't think part 2 was necessary. Still to this day would argue that it's not that relevant. And I was even willing to sign something testifying that I would never work as an engineer if they just let me out. I finished part 2 with a couple of rewrites. And, but again, my graduating average slipped, and in part because I got active in sports and active in politics. And that wasn't recognized, if you will, purely on a transcript. And it taught me then a lot about the sort of person I would ultimately look to partner with, and it was never going to be a pure transcript. It was someone who had life experience and rounded out experience, if you will, as a partner, who understood sort of the trials and tribulations. Because what I had accomplished in completing an engineering degree was sometimes 3 times the work, effort, and reward of other people who've gone purely down an academic route and done nothing else. So ultimately, I got into the MBA program on a probationary basis. I had 3 conditions. One is I had to get it.
The third time you've been on probation, Brent.
Well, you've done most of your homework. There was, what was the first cause? First condition was I had to write my GMAT, which is the entrance exam, and I hadn't even done that when I walked in. Second was once they let me in, I had to have a minimum of an A average in my first classes. And the third was I had to stay out of student politics.
Okay.
The dean of the business school knew about me.
Perfect. I want to go back to high school. I'm going to relate this to education a little bit. I think we're close to the same age. You know, we had grade 13 in my time frame back then, and then I remember always going to talk to this counselor, guidance counselor, about, you know, I'm going to leave grade 13. What is it, Steve, you think you want to do? Or they would give you the menu of things, right? Like, yeah, I'd be a policeman or fireman or work at General Motors or sell cars or insurance or whatever it may have been. Back then, there was nothing on their menu that said, start your own business. And we really have come a long way. You know, whether it's an elementary school, colleges, universities right across Canada. I know there's a lot of great work done here in GTA at George Brown and Humber, College of Entrepreneurship, U of T. What does education need to do? How do we need to engage our youth with this entrepreneurial mindset?
Well, I actually think, and I've pitched this to the University of Calgary and the University of Saskatchewan, and I've talked to any academics that will listen, but I believe that at the high school level and then ultimately at the university level, there's 3 classes that every single student should take, and it doesn't matter whether you've got gray hair and you're still thinking about life. Learning is a lifelong experience, so
absolutely.
It's never too late to do these things. But number one is marketing. I think marketing is underrated and misunderstood. But marketing, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a veterinarian, I don't care. Any of those fields, whether you end up in public practice, private practice, a doctor, a hospital, or in a government setting, understanding a little bit about marketing will help you do 2 things. One is differentiate yourself against your peers in terms of looking for a job, even if it just helps you do a better resume. A marketing class is going to help you. Secondly, it's going to help you in terms of your employer. I mean, I don't care what business you're in. You're competing for funds, or you're competing for clients, or you're competing for resources of some sort. Understanding marketing is going to be an invaluable tool. As I often say to students, if you study marketing and then take the time to study a bit of psychology, which will help you understand marketing, and possibly your parents, it's going to be a benefit for all of you. Marketing at every level, and again, it can be customized to a grade 9 level class, it can be customized to grade 12, and I think it should be a requirement no matter what you're studying. Theology or veterinarian medicine, I don't care. Everyone should be required to study that. Secondly, I believe in terms of changing our nation's perspective on entrepreneurship, that you should study entrepreneurship, that nature versus nurture.
I'm going to clap my hands right there.
One of the things that I love about Dragon's Den is it does celebrate the entrepreneur experience. Now, we beat the crap out of people who come on the show, but it's not me and all that stuff. We're not going to name Kevin, but someone has to be. I can't even say those words.
Someone has to be that word, yes.
Someone has to be Simon.
Right.
But going back, so I believe marketing is critical. I believe that entrepreneurship, and again, you can't necessarily teach people to be entrepreneurs, but raising the awareness of the entrepreneurial experience so that people going through school, I think we pigeonhole our students in terms of, I have a daughter who just finished engineering. She's about to go sailing across the Atlantic for a couple of months, and then I think she's going to go to someplace in the States and study to be a chef. I'm delighted and excited because there's nothing magical about finishing a degree and then following that course of action. She's got, she's watched me go through dozens, if not hundreds, of different businesses, and she's excited about all the things that she's got in front of her. And so I think we pigeonhole our youth too much to study this and then you'll be that. And I think studying entrepreneurship will give you an opportunity to see what it's like when you buy a division out of a large company or you start your own small business. And the other thing is that inside even large corporations, every new project is in itself an entrepreneurial experience. So you don't need to be. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I did my MBA, I was the first graduate of the University of Calgary to take the designation entrepreneurship. 4 or 5 people before me had qualified for the entrepreneurship, but they didn't want it on their resume because they were afraid they couldn't get a job.
Wow.
That speaks to the mindset at the time. Then some goofball professor dreamt up this concept of intrapreneurship, which was entrepreneurship in big companies. Bullshit. It's all entrepreneurship. That word out. Stop pretending it is what it is. In fact, University of Calgary dropped its entrepreneurship program about 10 years ago. And I stopped funding. I just cut them
Oh.
right there. Of course, 2 years later, I became Graduate of the Year. So we're still talking about things we could do together. I haven't forgotten. Anyway, so entrepreneurship needs to be studied. And then the last that I think should be introduced at a young level and continued is a discussion and debate about what constitutes personal and corporate social responsibility, and integrating that into your life right from the start. I think that a discussion over, I had a great debate. One of my daughters came to me at their school, and parents were being asked to put up money, and they were building a tree to celebrate donors. And you got a larger leaf if you gave more money. And my daughter came to me and said, "This is wrong, Dad. I mean, I know you're going to be one of the big donors, but I don't want our name on a big leaf." They didn't want the profile and brand recognition. And so I had a discussion about, well, is there not something in terms of celebrating what we've done, recognizing what we've done, and inspiring others to participate? And she said, "No way, I don't want that." But the great part was we had the discussion and debate. You know, should giving be altruistic, or should giving have a reward in terms of, and ultimately even giving that's altruistic, you're getting a feel good for it.
Sure.
But I love having the debate because both sides are right. There's just a time and a place. Do you need your name on a building, or do you want to give anonymously? Anonymous giving doesn't really inspire others. So there's a debate, and I just love having a discussion. Having classes at grade 8, grade 9, I was involved with the Kielburgers We Day just recently, and watching youth, there was a couple hundred people watching, a couple 100,000 students watching this program called We Day. There's a feel-good associated with that.
I want to stick with that youth entrepreneurship topic for 1 second. I know you're going to be receiving an award from the Canadian Youth Business Foundation in the next month or so. That's a group. They launch about 500 new youth entrepreneurship businesses a year. If you were a youth entrepreneur, if you were right now, and they define youth now between 18 and 32.
So we're just out.
We're just out. Yeah, we're just out. What would your advice be to a youth entrepreneur today starting a new venture?
Well, first of all, the education side, which we've talked about. And second is get life experience. And I think sometimes youth get pretty excited about starting their own business, and it's premature. I don't mean to rain on what they're trying to do, because I want to excite them, believe me. I want to excite them more than anything, whether it's junior achievement or CYBF or whatever. I want the students to be engaged and interested in getting into business. So I don't mean that at all. They shouldn't do that. But I think spending time, in particular, in the service industry, is going to teach you about dealing with people, because there's no job tougher than being a waiter or waitress and having to deal with people like us coming in, the coffee's too hot, the food's too slow, whatever it is, but learning to deal with people. So people experiences are really invaluable, and that's where I say getting part-time work in that field and spending some time at that. The other is whatever your passion is, whether it's going to be marketing or production or whatever it is, get some real life experience under people with that. And candidly, coming out of high school, you're not ready. In the most part. I mean, you can give me reasons why, and there'll be exceptions to the rule, but those are rare. And I think the odds of success go up dramatically if you've taken the time both to educate and get some real life experience. But as long as you've got an end game in mind of owning equity, being part of the team that's making a difference, you're going to get there anyway. So whether it's 25, 35, 35, 45, doesn't much matter. I think getting that life experience is critical. Okay.
Brett, when you were younger, you worked for a company before you started your own business, and I think you had a boss that kind of said to you, Brett, kind of get used to where you are right now. You're not going to move up the company ladder. We don't see a whole lot of future for you within the company. Did that motivate you to go on to do better things?
Well, I shot him.
Okay.
That was the fourth probation. It was actually, the story's a little different than that, but I took a management aptitude test, or an aptitude test when I was working for Imperial Oil, and my goal, given my background in student politics, is I wanted to be in upper management at a big oil company. And I failed their aptitude test in terms of management miserably, and they made it clear that I would be a technical specialist. Well, I wasn't excited about being an engineer. So it was really a disconnect for me, listening to these people saying, well, you're never going to make it in management. My frustration there, of course, drove me off to do an MBA. And it was later that I looked back and realized that I was never going to be management inside a large, monolithic, bureaucratic organization.
Right.
I couldn't do it. So I didn't suit the type of person that would be a manager in a large company. But it didn't mean for a moment that I couldn't be an entrepreneur, couldn't be a great partner, couldn't be a great businessman. And so that way it was demoralizing when I got the results of the exam, because I was sitting there working the last 3-4 years, fully expecting to move up in management. So it was probably the best thing that I ever did for myself, was that kick in the ass that drove me out the door.
Was it a large company?
Imperial Oil. Name it.
You ever thought about going back and buying that company?
Actually, I made a lot of money shorting their stock a number of years ago. But nothing to do with, well, they picked on me. I didn't like that.
Kind of on the same line here, I read about the story that you had talked about. You had, when this company started, you had an accountant. You weren't drawing a lot of money out. This accountant said to you, Brett, shut it down. But you didn't. What made you want to prove that person wrong, or whoever?
Well, the reality was, it was one of my first eye-opening experiences. I understood, again, I'm an engineer, took accounting. I understood financial statements and the way the whole machine works. But as my accountant came to me and said, Jamie and Mackey and I had started Willson Mackey, so we're brokering oil and gas properties. And the first 6 months, there was no business, just pounding the pavement, trying to find mandates to buy or sell oil and gas properties. Second 6 months, things have gone reasonably well, but there's a lag time in getting business closed, and then a lag time in getting paid. So there we are in our first year, and we made about $100,000 between the two of us. And we had a 60-40 split, so I'm at $60,000, he'd made $40,000. But the queue of inventory, work in progress, was enormous, and we ended up making those kind of wages every month in the second year. But our accountant finished off our financial statements while we're in the midst of this surge of work.
Right.
And she said, are you sure you want to continue? And it reinforced for me the way accountants look backwards. You can't drive through life when you're looking in the rearview mirror. You've got to look forward. And it really opened my eyes to her perception that we weren't going to make it. Was just so wrong. When I was working, again, 80 hours a week, but I was making more money in a month than I made in a year in the second year of business. And she was thinking we should wind her up.
So you looked ahead, there's that entrepreneur, you looked at the different. You looked ahead as opposed to in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, I mean, you got to base yourself off your financial statements in the past, and certainly banks and other investors are going to look at that. But the queue of work, the inventory was just enormous. And we did, in our first year, we did $100 million worth of sales, if you will, in the second 6 months of business. And in our second year, we did over $1 billion worth of business. So things took off. And, it was
big growth.
We had a good run. And then we started First Energy. And that's when things really took off.
Interesting. You've had business partners.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. And I know you've had a line, it's important the way you choose your partner. Some partnerships have worked, some haven't. Tell me what, in a partnership in your mind, what makes it work, what doesn't make it work?
Well, the starting point in any partnership to me is honesty, open communication, integrity. If you've got sort of those core values, then you're going to be able to work your way through challenges. I ended up working, one of my first experiences, I was with McLeod Youngware, one of the big investment banks for, well actually they announced my 5th anniversary in their internal newsletter 3 months after I quit. You know that you've been missed greatly when you're still in the payroll system, or at least HR still thinks you're there and you're gone. I wasn't contributing maybe as much as I thought I was. But so 5 years with them, and then I ended up working with a small investment bank where I was being encouraged to believe that I was the guy's partner, and I came into the shop. But what I discovered was someone who was as devoid of integrity as anyone I've ever met in my life. And I ended up staying for a year and a half, but it was just the most miserable existence possible. It was hugely frustrating. We would sign a confidentiality agreement about information, and 2 minutes later we were building models to take the information to someone else and see if we could create a merger. Just stuff that was absolutely inappropriate. We'd sign a contract, and the first thing we'd do is reread the contract to see if we could interpret it in our favor to screw the client. I just don't do business that way. I'll never do business that way.
Good for you.
And so it was a learning experience with him. And so when I got out and started my own business, we started doing things differently. In fact, almost the opposite of everything I'd seen done with that guy. And choosing partners, I've had incredible success at choosing. I mean, a couple of partnerships haven't gone well, but on balance, I partnered with Murray Edwards, Rick Kraft, and Jim Davidson, 3 of the best minds in the business when we started First Energy. Partnered with Bruce Chernoff, who's one of the most leading out-of-the-box thinkers in terms of starting a number of companies together. John Bruce, one of the top tax lawyers in the country. I even give my ex-wife credit for the 3 kids we had. You know, those are great partners. As much as she and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, those 3 kids are an amazing outcome.
And we'll talk about family in a little bit. I think that's great. I want to get to that topic of mentoring.
Right.
And I was fortunate in my career to mentor a guy named Senator Keith Davey up in Ottawa. Wonderful guy. They called him the Rainmaker. And he wasn't just a business mentor, he was also a bit of a life mentor. And I kind of believe there's a need for both, a life mentor and a business mentor. And when he talked about to me in life mentoring terms, he had a great line: always do a favor, never bear a grudge. And something from a mentor that I've always sort of held with me. And then his other business mentoring line he always taught me is that none of us is as strong as always. Did you have a mentor in business?
You know, at the end of the day, I had, looking back, I had a number of mentors. In fact, when I was at McLeod Young Weir, I ended up having 3. And in a sense, as much as they weren't intimately involved with, sort of mentoring me personally, they were my bosses. So I looked up to them and learned from them and watched and saw how they did their work. And they were all 3 people who could do business on a handshake. That taught me a lot in the investment banking world, especially in the cutthroat investment banking world in downtown Toronto. Dan Sullivan was my boss, taught me a lot about real estate investing. He's now Canadian Consul General down in New York for Canada. Jim McDonald, who was one of the brightest merger and acquisition M&A minds in the country, was my immediate boss for a couple of years. And then David Willson, who's now chairman of the Ontario Securities Commission, was head of the department I worked in. And I had direct involvement and worked with all of them. So again, it wasn't necessarily a mentoring role. It was a boss-employee role. But I took the opportunity to learn from them. I was just wide-eyed in learning. It was just fabulous, as it turned out. I mean, these guys all went on to be icons of the Canadian investment banking industry. And they were 3 of the most influential people in my career in setting how I see things and just defining for me what's right. Because these guys were, again, integrity.
Yeah. Fast forward 2009, if you were going to meet your mentor this morning, right after we left here, one of the mentors you had, tell me what that conversation would be like right now.
I'd probably like to spend a little time with Richard Branson.
Okay.
I love his flair for the unusual. I love his branding. I love his sense of doing what's right. He's got he understands the concept of the entrepreneurial philanthropist and the philanthropic entrepreneur. Though he may not use those words, those might be mine, but I think both are very relevant, and he personifies both on a global basis.
Awesome. A lot of value in mentoring, a lot of value in the people that we look up. I want to have a little bit of fun right now, Brett. I want to do a little bit of a word association game. You guys keep score here. So I'm going to say a phrase.
Okay.
And what I do have